Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome back to the show. Super excited for the show that we have planned for you guys today. It's going to be a two-part episode, and I think you guys are really going to like it. But super excited. But first, of course, wanted to check in with you and see how are you? How's your week going? I'm super glad that you guys can be here with me today, and I'm just excited to be talking to you guys. It's always a lot of fun doing podcasting. It doesn't really feel like work. It almost feels like you're just showing up, and doing something that you love, which is also a lot of fun. So I am so glad to be here talking with you guys. Of course, let's get the housekeeping out of the way so you guys can be in the know about all things A Date with Darkness. If you were looking for support for members in a free community, you can check out A Date with Darkness, the Facebook group over on Facebook. If you want to be a part of my newsletter that goes out every Friday morning at 8 a.m., you can go on over to drnataliejones.com and sign up for the newsletter. Right now, there is a free ebook and recognizing red flags in your relationships. You can download that for free and get on the mailing list. So definitely check those things out. If you like what you hear on the podcast, support a small podcast by liking and sharing with other folks, leaving a positive review so that other folks can find this podcast. And as always, we are on the YouTube channel now, so be sure to check this out on YouTube if you prefer to watch videos of interviews instead. And also, lastly, but certainly not least, we have the membership coaching, individual and group membership coaching that is available. So you can definitely go down to the links in the show notes to find out more about that and get up on the sign up list for that also. And everything is going to be listed down in the show notes. So for today's guest, I have a popular, very talented coach, Miss Erika Simone, who provides coaching for Christian women of faith who are healing from their relationships and seeking out better quality relationships. And Erika and I are going to talk a lot about spirituality, limerence, masculinity and femininity, and just how to heal and recover after you've been in some relationships that aren't so good to you. And this is a two-part episode because she's just I just love her, and I thought that the information that she gave really vibes with the energy of the show, and so I thought maybe you guys would really like it too. Without further ado, here is Miss Erika Simone. Hello and welcome to the show, Erika.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. It's so exciting.
I'm excited to have you on. So for the
Yeah.
listeners, tell us who you are, what you do, and the passion behind your work.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm Erika Simone. I am a dating and relationship coach with a big focus on inner healing and like attachment styles and kind of like the inner work and emotional healing behind attracting and creating your dream relationship. My passion started from just my own experiences. So just a little background. My parents got divorced when I was 3. Grew up with a lot of family dysfunction, a lot
Mhm.
of emotionally unavailable caregivers, a lot of struggles with rejection, abandonment, all of this, and I never really realized how it was affecting me until late high school, college, where I started to date and do relationships. And I found myself in a lot of unhealthy relationships, a lot of toxic patterns, attracting a lot of emotionally unavailable men, and just being what is going on? Like, why is love? Why does it feel so hard for me? And I would look at other people and be like, man, like they, met their person, it's smooth and easy, and why are there all this blocks or resistance or what's going on? So that really started a journey for me of just doing tons of research. My degree's in psychology, so I always have had a passion for why we do the things we do. And I saw like a meme one time on Instagram, and I was like, people who are psych majors normally they went through some type of trauma or family dysfunction, and it kind of like that's true. Um,
Absolutely.
so I really just started doing this deep dive, reading tons of books, podcasts, my own time in therapy, my own time working with coaches, doing courses, really trying to figure out like, okay, what goes into, having a healthy relationship, attracting a secure partner. And then also for me, like, understanding men better and just everything that goes behind dating and relationships. And so, yeah,
Mm.
I just started coaching out of a place of wanting to help other women avoid the pitfalls that I made. I have so many instances where I remember just, crying or being so upset about something. And I really
Mhm.
remember, I'm a Christian, by the way. So, I talk about God in my own life and stuff. I just remember like feeling like he's putting on my heart, like, you're going through all this and you're going to help other women overcome these things, and learn from your mistakes. So, yeah.
Mm.
So long story short, my own trauma, my own relationship issues, learning what was going on psychologically, all that healing, and now wanting to help other women do the same thing.
I love that, and I appreciate how eloquently you put that, and just shared your story. And, a lot of what you shared definitely resonates with you. And I'm glad, I'm really glad that you pointed out that you're a Christian,
Mhm.
and that's so refreshing to hear. I'm Presbyterian, which is a denomination of Christianity,
Yeah.
but I also work with a lot of women who do identify themselves as Christians.
Mhm.
And the reason why I want to sort of pick that out in terms of how you talked about your relationship with God for a moment,
Mhm.
is that there are women like you that have gone through, you and me, who've gone through some relationships, gone through some family traumas, and gone through some stuff.
Mhm.
Um, but they may start to question their relationship with God, or does God care, or did God forget,
Yeah.
or did I do something? Is God mad at me? Or maybe even questioning God's existence because, they've gone through some pretty painful experiences.
Mhm.
Was that something that ever came up for you?
Hmm. Yeah, it can get really complicated because when I work with clients, I break it down like this, right? So God created us, we're body, mind, spirit, soul, right? And so I think, and obviously being on this earth, God has given us all free will. We all have our own choice. And so for
Mhm.
me, going through trauma, and a lot of my trauma was around a lot of CPTSD. So emotionally unavailable parents, abandonment, rejection, that kind of emotional trauma. And that hits on, 3 main things: low self-worth, relationship issues, and being emotionally dysregulated.
Mhm.
So for me, I think I've had a lot of moments of grieving. For example, I've gone through a lot with my mom recently. I I didn't realize it, but I had a huge mother wound.
Mhm.
A lot of like maternal narcissism there, and just that whole deep dive. And I've had a lot of moments with God, like, why did this happen? Like, this is so painful. But I don't think I ever questioned God's existence because I always knew that like God has given us free will. So like with free will, people can choose to do bad things. Are born into a sinful world. Like and I know people have their own trauma and they pass that down. So I don't think I ever questioned God's existence, but I think I've been angry with God. I will say that. I've had moments of being resentful,
Mhm.
um, being like, why couldn't I have had a happy family? Like, why couldn't I have had a functional home? Like, why did you, make me, why was I born into this type of dynamic, or even being a coach, helping other women? I'm like, I've had times where I'm like, man, God, I wish I didn't have to go through this, but I'm so glad because I'm seeing like the depth that I've been able to experience God's love has been so much deeper than I think it could have been if I had had everything I had needed in that sense. So I think like, yeah, I've had so many moments where I'm like, God, like I need you to father me or mother me or love on me because I feel alone. Like I can't hit up my mom right now or like, so I hope that answers the question, but it can definitely be something that people struggle with because, God's all powerful. So you're like, God, why couldn't you change this, circumstance? But I'm also aware that while we're on this side of earth, there's always going to be sin, trauma, dysfunctionality, addictions, all these things that lead people to act in a certain way. So I never try to like blame God for other people's actions. And I'd never try to,
Mm,
like, I
I
don't want to
love
project.
that.
Yeah. I
I
don't want to
love that.
project, but I know that projection is a major thing, especially if you have a father wound,
Mhm.
like with the father wound, because, God is presented to us as
The father.
father. And I think the enemy really goes hard against the role of father, especially in the Black community. We see things with slavery, mass incarceration, all this breakdown of the family unit, all this breakdown of men. And I think it's really strategic because, our relationship with our earthly father is going to set the standard for how we view God and how we
Mm.
relate to him and stuff. So hopefully that answers the question.
No, I love that. I liked how you mentioned the father piece because that was something
Yeah,
that I hadn't thought of, but it does make a lot of sense if you have a father wound, right? And you sort of project that, and that's the way that it comes out.
sure.
I've always felt like it was a projection, but the father
Hmm.
wound, I like that.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you
'Cause-
talk? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh no, sorry. I was just gonna say, just in case anyone else is kind of like doesn't, it's kind of hard to make the connection. Like for my own life, my
Mm,
dad was pretty emotionally unavailable. So for me, that's how I viewed God. It was really hard for me to relate to him. And
uh-huh.
like I didn't feel like he cared about my emotions, or I thought God would be like, it's fine, you're being dramatic, like it's just do right, you know what I mean? And then for others, maybe like their dad was abusive, trigger warning, or violent. And so you think God is like this angry, abusive person, or maybe if your father was never there, maybe you don't think God is there for you, or like if your father never really provided for you financially, maybe you have trouble trusting God. So it definitely can show up.
It makes a lot of sense, right? Because, God at some point was safety for you,
Mhm.
and it's kind of like when people show up for me for therapy, right? And I've worked with clients, men, women, you name it. I've worked with clients, and some of my clients have done pretty awful things, and some of my clients are just high functioning human beings, and just all walks of life.
Yeah.
But the one universal thing that I've noticed is that whenever the work gets really deep in the therapy room, clients always project.
Hmm.
And so when they're feeling safe with me, they always project onto me. Right. And they,
Yes.
if they haven't ever been given space to feel angry or feel love or feel vulnerable, that always comes out. So it would make sense that, something or some being, I'll put it that way, that has
Mhm.
always been a safe haven for someone is a source of projection. They project onto that when they're at their lowest moment because they feel like that is all they have, even when they don't feel like they have it, if that makes sense.
Right. Yes. Yeah. It's a lot of displaced anger. To where and I see
Mhm.
that a lot in relationships too. For example,
Yes.
a lot of anger towards your mom or your father, like especially for women. And then you get, say, in a relationship with a man who is good and healthy and stable, and you put him through hell because it's like this. Like you said, when you have a safe space to express how you really feel, it's going to lash out on them. But you
Mhm.
know, it's often hard to being vulnerable, share how you felt with the person who was the cause of that trauma because they're not going to accept it. So, and then I see that too in the reverse with men, with women, like if they have a lot of anger towards their mother wound, mother issues, really hard, and then a lot of times those men will turn out to be abusive towards women or mistreat them because their first encounter with the feminine, with the mother, it's disrupting, and then we take it out on people later on. It's like the whole quote, like if you don't heal, you'll bleed on people who didn't cut you. That whole thing, it really is
I
true.
agree. I totally agree. Plus, I also think modeling
Yes.
is a big component of it too. So, however, whatever you grow up seeing, in terms of your parents and or caregivers, however you saw the dynamics or the interactions with them is a lot of times the same thing that will play out with you, even if logically you say up here, I don't want that to happen, right? I don't want that to happen to me, or I don't want to be that way in my relationships. And people often get, very upset with themselves when they show a repeated cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I talk to my clients a lot about is, our conscious and subconscious mind, to where, your subconscious, that's like controlling, like, I think they say like 90% of your life. So it's like,
Mhm.
and your subconscious mind is formed from, I think when you're in the womb to 7, it's fully formed. So you have
Mhm.
all these memories, all these traumatic experiences, even being in the womb. And like, if your mother said like, I don't want this child, all this rejection that comes in, all this stuff, right? And so now we're older and we're not aware of why we have certain patterns or beliefs or feelings, and it's stored there. And then also like on a body level, when you go through different trauma, you get super dysregulated in your nervous system. And it's all these things that it's like building memories in your body, emotional memories, all this stuff. And so we have these patterns and we don't know why until we start doing that work and bringing it to awareness. So I think that's definitely a big thing, is that sometimes it's like what you consciously want to do or know is not always lining up with what feels familiar, what feels, like your patterns playing out.
Tell me about dysregulation. What is it and why do we do it?
Okay. So yeah, so I think there's been a lot more research and stuff now on the connection of mind body. So all
Mhm.
that with trauma. And that was one thing for me. I know there's tons of different types of therapy models, but for me, for when I first started kind of my healing journey, I was focusing on a lot of like talk therapy, CBT, BBT models. And that's really great for like processing, having someone to talk to, awareness. But then I realized, okay, like, and I'm a psych major too, so I can tell you everything about my trauma. I know everything, but I was still having a lot of blocks and a lot of the same triggers and stuff, until I started to do a lot more research into trauma and the body and your nervous system.
Yep.
And like I said earlier, my focus is on a lot of women that come to me have a lot of CPTSDs, like I said. So unavailable parents, neglect, abandonment, all that stuff. So it's repeated and over time, and it's interpersonal in nature type of trauma rather than like say a car accident or something. And so when you go through CPTSD, it affects 3 main areas. Like I said, self-esteem, relationship difficulties, and emotional dysregulation / your nervous system. So when you go through trauma, it's a direct hit to your nervous system. It overwhelms your ability to cope, to self-soothe, to regulate. You're no longer in that window of tolerance of what you can take. And when you get dysregulated, your nervous system I explain to my clients like a ladder model, because I'm a very visual person. So your nervous system is 3 parts. The top, you have ventral. So that's when you're happy, you're motivated, you're feeling good, you're feeling safe. Safety is very, very key for being in that state. I mean, then triggers come in or stressors come in. That could be money, it could be a person, it could be whatever. A stressor comes in, and then that dysregulates you, and then you drop down to your sympathetic nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when you have imagine too much energy in your body. So that's when you experience a lot of anxiety, panic, and anger, and you get flight or flight. Exactly. Because God created us so smartly, so that's because example, if you think about this in the context of being in the woods and a bear comes, you need to be sympathetic, you need to be ready to fight, you need that energy, like let's go.
Mm-hmm.
And then after a while, if you're fighting that stressor, all the energy in your body, but say the stressor is not going away, your body also tries to keep you safe by dropping down to your dorsal state. So that's when you're like depressed, dissociated, numb, because your body's like, you know what, we can't fight this stressor. So we need to dissociate and check out so that we can keep ourselves safe, And so you get down to that state. But what happens is that whole mechanism is great when you're like trying to fight a bear. But what happens is a lot of us, our nervous system is doing all of this, our, cortisol is being released, we're stressors every day.
Mm-hmm.
If you grew up in a home with that type of
chaotic environment.
Yeah, narcissistic parents, unavailable parents, rejecting parents,
Mm-hmm.
all of that. And so what's happening is that you're super dysregulated and there's so much trauma in your body, stress hormones, your body's inflamed. That's where a lot of like chronic illnesses and stuff, because like your body, that stress hormone being released, we weren't created to be, it's not supposed to be like that every day. Like it shifts from being adaptive to now maladaptive, helpful to now not good for you. And so what I realized for me in my personal examples, like I said, I do a lot of work around attachment styles, and I lean more towards the anxious attachment style. So for me, and that means that for me, a lot of times when I get triggered, when I get stressed or whatever, especially in relationships, I drop down more to that sympathetic state. So I feel that anxiety or I feel that anger, even like in conflicts, my trauma response is normally the fight one in conflict, where I'm like, let's talk about it right now. Let's go. And so For a lot of people, wait, I'm sorry. What was the original question? This is, I was like, wait, what?
I had asked you to tell us about dysregulation.
Oh, yeah. So, yes, when you go through trauma, you get dysregulated. And so a lot of healing comes to learning how to feel safe and calm again in the body. So a lot of grounding techniques and whatever, like, for example, if you're usually in that sympathetic state, for you, you need to release energy to get back to ventral. So that can look like exercise, dancing, jumping, meditation, journaling. And then if you're someone who's, you drop down to dorsal more, you get in that free state. Then for you, a lot of it is being able to safely add energy back to the body. So sitting in the sun, getting warmth, dancing, FaceTiming, doing things that add energy back to that body to get to that ventral state. And I found that having a dysregulated nervous system is so good for a healthy relationship, because that will be a huge part of how you handle conflict and communication. Because like I said, when you get dysregulated, that's when you start to handle conflict from that fight or flight. So either you're someone in fight, like you get really loud, you want to yell, or your flight, you run away, you shut down, you get passive aggressive, or you freeze, or you do the fawn one. So
I love that. I love all of the things that you broke down.
yeah.
So if there's somebody who's listening to you and they're hearing what you're saying, but they're not quite sure if they have trouble with dysregulations, what, like if they're dysregulated again, because it's so normalized, like what you said, what should they look for if they are, what are some of the telltale signs that yes, you have some problems with dysregulation?
Yeah, there's a lot. I think one of the major things is noticing your triggers. So what triggers you? And then when you get triggered, how do you react? How do you respond? And so, or just even your day-to-day life, like for example, signs you're dysregulated and that you're probably in that sympathetic fight or flight state is like, if you struggle with a lot of OCD, perfectionism, you're very irritable, you get overwhelmed easily, you're often controlling, or if you get really, sometimes narcissistic in your relationships, all that kind of stuff. And the signs that you may be in that freeze or dorsal state is if you are often numbing, you dissociate a lot, like you're binging Netflix for hours, or you struggle with any type of addictions, or you're just feeling hopeless, or it's hard for you to get up. Like anytime that you're not in that state of, that feeling safe, feeling calm in the body, and then also your window of tolerance, like I talked about. So for example, people who have a regulated nervous system, a stressor can happen, but it doesn't like totally get you out of whack. For example, I know money is a big stressor for people. So say maybe you have like a bill due, and for some reason you're supposed to get paid, you didn't get paid, right? A sign that you could, you may be in that dysregulated state is that if this stressor like goes way beyond your ability to cope. So now you're like having a breakdown, you're crying, you're freaking out, or blah, blah, blah. Like it's usually a sign that there's some type of trigger there, or that you're already dysregulated, versus someone who's like, oh yeah, like, the bill's not getting paid today. Like, it's okay. I'll call the office. It's good. Rather you freak out, you cry, you're like, I don't know what to do. And like, you're having a panic attack, anything like that. And so I think a lot of us do struggle with being dysregulated, because not only do we have different traumas built up over years we haven't processed, but also like, I do think, the world we live in, there's, you turn on the news, you go on social media, there's so much trauma we're taking in that can be very dysregulating as well.
And so what are some ways that we can sort of regulate ourselves? I heard you mention grounding. And I like grounding, but and I'll let you kind of go into it. The one caveat I have with grounding is a start. But it does not get you through to the point where you actually learn how to regulate. So can you talk about ways in which someone can learn to self-regulate their emotions?
Yes, which is so huge. So like I said, it's going to depend on what your patterns are. For me, I'll do my example because this is what I have the most, experience with. But when I get dysregulated, I often am in that sympathetic state. So I'm prone to more anxiety, panic, anger. I have too much energy in my body. I can get very OCD, perfectionism, like it's just too much. And so one of the major things, so when you are triggered, your prefrontal cortex, which is a part of the brain that controls, logic, reason, that gets shut off. And so that's why when you get triggered, sometimes you do things you wouldn't normally do, or like you can't think, or like you just do crazy things that you wouldn't do if you were, in that calm mental state. And so one of the first things I always tell people is a simple thing is like the 5 sense challenge. So, what are 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, all that stuff. Because what that does is that it forces your logic brain to get thinking. It forces your prefrontal cortex to get back on. It gets you back in the present moment. Because when you get triggered, for example, when you're in that sympathetic anxious state, you're thinking way ahead.
Absolutely.
Or you're freaking out about the past. You're not in the present. And you don't feel safe. That's the biggest thing, especially when you feel anxious. You need to get curious about what does not feel safe to me right now. You can't just like ignore the anxiety or just try to like meditate it away, like ignore it. Like you need to get present in your body, check in with yourself. What does not feel safe for me right now? And a lot of times I find that it's usually something going all the way back to childhood, and it's that inner child stuff playing out. Right. Something as simple as like, oh, my friend, she took hours to text me back and now you're angry, and you're like, or you're feeling like, especially like people with an anxious attachment style, they can go into this thing called protest behaviors. So for example, in let's say relationship context, this happens a lot. Like, for example, say you're dating a guy or something, he hasn't texted you back all day, and it's triggering, and you need to start to do protest behaviors like, fine, I'll take 10 hours to text him back, or the opposite, I'm gonna blow up his phone, whatever. And you're doing all this stuff, and then you check in yourself, and it's like, wait, okay, why? Like, what about this is triggering to me? Why does this not feel safe? And a lot of times you do that inner work and find, oh, this reminds me of in childhood when I felt like no one wanted to talk to me, or I felt abandoned, or I felt rejected. Now I'm feeling that same thing all again, that he doesn't actually want me, he doesn't care about me, all that kind of stuff,
Creative stories.
Exactly. So even something as simple as a grounding technique to get that prefrontal cortex back on, it can help you get back in the present state to realize what doesn't feel safe and work through that trigger. But I noticed that when you're in that dysregulated trigger state, it's hard for you to do that logic thinking to actually reason, because you're so triggered and dysregulated. Like reasoning, oh, maybe you need to text me back because work got really busy or his phone died, So it's like, wait, let's get back in the body. Let's feel safe again. Let's feel calm again. And then from there, there's other techniques you can do. Like I said, depending on what state your nervous system is in, and things that you can do to add energy or release that energy. Like I said, like, sitting in the sun, dancing, jumping, exercise, FaceTiming a friend, talking to someone, things like that.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. I've heard you mention CPTSD. Can you tell us about complex PTSD and what that
Yeah.
for people that don't know?
Yeah, in simple terms, complex PTSD, it's repeated interpersonal trauma over time. So in other words, relational trauma. So think of growing up with a parent that was emotionally unavailable. So either your mother or your father. And when I say emotionally unavailable, I know some people, they basically mean someone who's unable to accept or process or talk about their own feelings. Thus, they often reject or ignore yours, and they cannot meet your own emotional needs. These are people that they stay more in the logic realm than the feeling realm. So the parents that are like, how's school? How's work? But you never really get that engagement. Hey, how are you feeling? What's going on with this? Like, they're not emotionally able to be there for you. And a lot of times it's because their parent was emotionally unavailable. I think back my generation, a lot of our parents grew up in a time where, especially in the Black community, it's survival mode. Okay. Like all their parents, like if you were fed, you had a home, you were good. That was the mentality, right? There wasn't a lot of this emotional connection and feeling seen and accepted because there's too much going on. And when people, poverty is also a form of trauma. When people are they're dysregulated, they're stressed, they don't have time to check in with you. They don't have time to be empathetic with you. It's survival mode. So they're more so surviving, not thriving. And then those parents pass that down to us, for me, I had a lot of times where, I'd be, and I was always kind of labeled the more like, oh, sensitive child, but really it's just like, no, I'm in touch with my feelings. But
like same here.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think too, for me, I experienced a lot of maternal narcissism and stuff. And so, another thing that can be a form of CPTSD, so like I said, emotionally unavailable parent, a parent who abandoned you, so maybe they were never in your life, or also being parentified, or that's a huge thing, where you either logistically or emotionally take on the parent role, where you're having to be a mom to your mother, or take care of the home because your dad's an alcoholic, or even divorce. Like I said, my parents got divorced when I was 3, and that was a major trauma for me. Because even though I was 3 and I can't remember it, my nervous system and my body, my subconscious remembers it. And my body remembers being young and hearing all the yelling in my home. all the custody stuff. And so, when you think of complex PTSD, that's the reason they call it complex. It's because, for example, if you think of PTSD like for war or getting car crash, it's a one incident thing, like a car crash. It happened once, and then okay, there's a lot of healing around. Like usually they do. I know like EMDR is a big thing. Like honing in on that one experience.
Yes.
But complex PTSD, it's a little bit more complex because it's like, what do you do when the person triggering you, causing your trauma, you live with them? They're your parent.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be the most loving thing. Or maybe you're still in high school and you can't get away from them. And it's like this ongoing thing because even as an adult, it's like, okay, every holiday, how are you going to engage with this? Or, so, and what makes it really hard too is that it's a relational trauma, right? And so that makes it so much harder for us to do relationships later on because our first basis for attachment, love, and connection has been skewed. So now, like maybe you were the mother to your mother, and now you're always attracting men with a lot of trauma and issues that you have to mother or fix. Or maybe you had a really narcissistic parent, and so now you're attracting narcissistic partners because that's how you're used to relating. Or if your parent was unavailable, and now you're someone really prone to a lot of like fantasy love because fantasy was the only way you got needs met. Like that was your way of escaping what was going on. Is like kind of this magical thinking type of thing. And then, like I said earlier, complex PTSD, it affects, main things is, low self-worth, so insecurity, relational difficulties, because like I said, that was your basis for relationships, and then having a dysregulated nervous system, emotional dysregulation, and hard time self-soothing. And a lot of times it's because you were not soothed as a child.
Yeah. I would agree. So if you grew up with all these things, how do you get on the path to attracting emotionally healthy partners? And I imagine, it's not just partners. It sounds like it's a tribe of people that you need to attract that are emotionally healthy. So that could be friendships,
Yes.
family-like figures and things like that.
Yes, that's a good question. Because it shows in friendships too. I realized that like, oh, we're attracting a lot of emotionally unavailable men.
Yes.
Friends are probably unavailable, some of them unavailable as well. So the path to healing, there's a lot of layers to it. One of the biggest things is self-awareness. You cannot heal what you're unaware of. You can't heal what you're numb to, what you're ignoring, right? So getting self-aware, and if you don't know how to get to that point, I want you to just get like very curious. Just start to question everything. Like growing up, I was that kid. I was always asking questions, and I probably got my parents' nerves. But now I'm grateful I was that way. So, like for example, the next time you maybe either a romantic relationship or a friendship or whatever, and you get upset by something, I want you to get curious. Why did that trigger me? Why did that make me feel so upset? What about this reminds me of childhood? What about this doesn't feel safe, right? So getting curious about your patterns, right? Or for example, if you're having a lot of relationship issues, I recommend something I give my clients is like a relationship inventory. So I give them like a table. It's okay. I want you to list every guy you've dated, either situationship, relationship, whatever, right? List their name. What was their attachment style? If you have a good idea of it. What were the patterns in the relationship? What attracted you to them? How did the relationship end? What were the common conflicts over? How'd they make you feel? And what you'll see is that you'll probably find a pattern. You'll see some commonalities. Because one thing I always tell my clients too is that, the whole like attracts like, and we live in a mirror universe. So whatever you're attracting is usually what's going on in you. So for me, for example, I was attracting a lot of emotionally unavailable men. And I used to feel so like, the whole like men are this, men are that, da, da, da. And I really I had to do a lot of work on healing my relationship with men in the masculine because I got very skewed with things that my dad and, the society we live in that's really bashing on men. But when I actually did the deeper work, I was like, maybe I'm emotionally unavailable myself. And I realized that part of me was because another thing too, when you experience a lot of trauma as a child, you have a lot of fear of commitment.
Yes.
And that comes out in two different ways. It's the active pattern and then the passive pattern. That's a whole other thing. But do an inventory, look at your patterns, and you'll usually see some commonalities. And then from there, it normally points back to what's going on in you. It's you, like that's the thing. When you're going through healing journey relationships, it's really easy to get into that victim mentality or fault, like blaming it everyone else. But one thing the Lord put this on my heart, like I think it was 2020, when I was just feeling very confused about everything and very like, well, these guys always send mixed signals and this and that. And I feel like the Lord was telling me, like, Erika, who is the common denominator in all of your relationships, all of your dating experiences?
You know, I hear people say that all the time, and I don't know. I don't like it.
You don't like it?
I don't. Well, because it's like, of course you're the common denominator. It's your
Mhm.
life. You know what I mean? But I almost feel like when people say that, and this is not you, but I just feel like when people say that, it's almost like um re-blaming or re-victimizing yourself.
Yeah,
Like
I can see
you're
that.
you're you're the problem.
Yeah.
Like you're the problem. And that's why that statement never sat right with me.
Yeah, I can see that. I think because I had that same thought, but I think what I realized is that what I learned, had to learn too, is that it's not about blame or pointing fault.
Yeah,
It's about responsibility
sure.
and how we co-create every relationship we're in,
Yeah.
right? So what happened to you is not your fault. It is not your fault, and
Yeah.
you're not the blame, but it's your responsibility to heal. You're the only one that can shift these patterns, that can heal it.
I
You know?
do agree with that. I do agree with that. And your trauma is not an excuse to victimize or project onto others per se.
Yes, yeah, and I found it very empowering because I was like, it made me feel, because that's the thing too. I think a lot of people are going on their healing journey. They can feel very disempowered. They can feel very like
Oh yeah.
there's no way out. This is what and it's like, but to realize that, oh, I was a common denominator. It felt empowering because before I realized that, it felt like I had no control. It felt like things were just happening to me, and or that
Mhm.
I just had bad luck with love, right?
Mhm.
Or that there was just something about me that healthy relationships, loving, it just maybe it wasn't pretty enough. Maybe it was this, maybe it was that. But when I realized a lot of what was playing out and my own factors contributing to it, it was so self-empowering because I was like, oh, like it's not only about like, oh, I'm attracting these men, I'm choosing them too. And if I'm choosing these type of men, then I can start to choose different type of men, right? I can start to, not settle for men who are unhealthy or unavailable or things like that.
So is that where you are now? In
In
terms
what
of
regard?
choosing emotionally available men. So
Mhm.
walk me through what that process looks like for you now in terms
Yes.
of how you're choosing and selecting appropriate partners.
Yes. So, like I said earlier, I do a lot of work with attachment stuff. And if you have an anxious attachment style, which, basically anxious attachment, you have a high fear of abandonment and rejection, you get very codependent, clingy in relationships, maybe on that kind of love addictive spectrum of just jumping from relationship to relationship. Basically, and that comes from a lot of, childhood with your parents probably were unavailable. And so you got anxious because you weren't sure about would they be here for me? You didn't know. So
Which
when you
is
have that.
also a form of emotional unavailability too.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if your mother was emotionally unavailable because that's the first relationship you will ever have. It starts in the womb with your mom. So
Yeah.
that goes deep for a lot of women,
Yeah.
especially in the Black community because there's so much trauma and hardening of a lot of women and all that stuff. But so a big thing for that, if you have an anxious attachment style, you often attract people with an avoidant attachment style, which, you know, most unavailable, mixed signals, fears, commitment, all of that. And it's called the anxious avoidant trap.
Mhm.
And it's a trap because like you want intimacy, they pull away, and then you pull away, then they come close, and it's like this whole thing. But what it looks like is, first, when it comes to attracting emotionally available men, all that stuff, healthy men, you have to know what you're looking for and get clear on what you want.
Mhm.
So another thing I walk my clients through is, let's do a little let's map it out. Like, what do you want in a future partner? What do you from a head, heart, soul, spirit level, how do you want him to be? And so
And
for a
the
lot of them,
first thing I'm sure people say they want is someone who's attractive.
yeah, that's definitely a thing. Yes, that's definitely external. Um, and the thing is, though, there's also a big psychology behind attraction,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
So sometimes we're attracted to men who are toxic because we grew up around a lot of toxicity.
Yes.
We get off on that high, that chase, the thrill, because
Yes.
like I said, your nervous system is so dysregulated. It's used to being in that sympathetic, anxious, high alert state. So
Yeah.
that's like where it's fun for you. And so sometimes you're attracted to unhealthy, all that kind of stuff, because it feels familiar and your body likes what's familiar because that feels comfortable, all that. So getting clear on what you want. So yeah, there's external, like, I want to be attractive to you, whatever that is, your standard. And then we're getting internal. So for a lot of women, they want a man who will be faithful, who will commit, who's available, who's loving. But then also for women, I think we also want a guy who knows how to embody that masculine energy of different stuff. He's confident, he knows how to lead, all that stuff. But kind of going back to the emotional availability part, I think knowing the signs of when someone's unavailable or they have an avoidant attachment style. So knowing what it looks like, knowing the patterns. And then I think a big part is, like you said earlier, we create stories around things a lot of times, right? And so a lot of times when you are attracted to, like, something I see a lot, people I talk to, it's like, I always like the guys who don't like me, and I never like the guys who do like me, right? And a lot of that can be around emotional unavailability as well. But for that, if you're noticing that you're, okay, this guy, he's unavailable, or he's avoidant, whatever, and you're still like so drawn to them, you keep choosing them, and that's when you get to check in with yourself. And so a few things that usually play out is, number one, I think for a lot of women, it's our nature to want to nurture, right? And so we want to be the fixer, we wanted this and that, but we have to realize, hey, we're not his mom, we're not his therapist. We cannot fix him, we cannot heal him, we cannot save him.
Yes. This is not build a man workshop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then two, like I said, sometimes we have our own fears of commitment, and we're emotionally unavailable as well. And so we keep choosing guys who are unavailable because we know that they won't require us to be available as well. Or we know it won't lead to a real relationship where we're going to have to be vulnerable and risk being rejected. So we play it safe by choosing men that we know it can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And so maybe your work is around there, like, okay, what are your fears around commitment? Are you really ready for a relationship, or do you just want the thrill and the high of a spark of a new romance, And then another thing too is, if you struggle with low self-worth, you will often be, choose unavailable men, because in your mind, if you can get them to become available for you, it's going to prove to yourself that you're worthy. And a lot of that too goes back to the fatherhood, where you're attracting men who are unavailable because maybe your dad was unavailable. So subconsciously that is familiar to you. And it's kind of the whole, you attract. And another thing too is that a lot of times you will attract partners who resemble conflict you've had with one of your parents as a way to like resolve the conflict through them. Right. So it's like, I can never get my dad available for me emotionally, but if I can get this guy available, it's going to correct that past experience. We're trying to use it as like this corrective thing. Same thing for like men with women and stuff and their mom. And so, yeah, like, number one, getting aware, what are the signs that someone's emotionally unavailable or avoidant? And I have some free guides that, explain that all and stuff. And it's also tons on Google and everything like that. So knowing what the signs are, and if you're like, okay, but I still just really want him, like I just have to have him, then like exploring, why is that? It's usually, is it the fear of commitment? Is it low self-worth? Is it, you really want, like, you more so want the mind games than an actual relationship? Is it limerence? That comes into play too. Like, you have magical thinking, like you have this whole fantasy that does not match reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're in that you're getting obsessive, you're in that limerence state because, like I said, you're used to fantasy connections in childhood, or you have to go off in the fantasy world to cope with the pain around you.
That's another episode. Well, we might have to do a
part. Yes.
Because I definitely think that that's a huge thing is limerence. And so that's definitely a different episode, but I like that you touched on that.
Yeah.
So those things are very valuable.
Yeah.
And thank you for that. We're at the end of the hour almost. I know.
I hope everything was clear. I know there's a lot and I talk kind of
fast.
No.
I love it. No, you were so on it. I love talking to you. You're one of those people, you're one of those people that for me is like a vibe, I'm like, oh, I can talk to her all day. She and I, we talk a lot of the same stuff, so it's super awesome when you can get, I guess, that like, you can just vibe and talk, have those conversations. People that people that have the experience, but not only just that have done the research, but also have the experience, like the personal
Yeah.
experience, and are doing the work,
Yeah.
and what I appreciate about you is your candor and how you sort of talked about, hey, I'm still working through my stuff. I just went through this thing with my
Hmm.
mom and all this stuff. And so this is, I notice that this is coming up for me. So this is the work that I'm doing for
Yeah.
myself as well.
Right. Yes. Yeah, I love to keep it honest.
Yeah.
And I not only my experiences, but all my girlfriends, and just you see the patterns play out. You even see it in different shows and TVs you watch. Like you start to learn
But
stuff like,
that's what people relate to, right? And this is what this show is about. It's about having candid conversations with stuff
mhm,
that people just like you and me, we can relate to. Like, oh, I can get what she's saying. She and I relate on so many different levels. So I think people appreciate that. Um, I certainly do anyway. So Erika, can you tell folks where they can find you and connect with you if they like your vibe too, and they want more of you, and tell us how we can keep in touch, and then tell us if you are working on anything that we could support you with.
yes, yeah. So pretty much everyone on social media at Erika Simone underscore ErikaSimone underscore. That's with my TikTok, my Instagram, my YouTube. I also have my own podcast, and it's called Healed and Free with Erika Simone.
Oh,
Yeah,
love it.
I have a couple episodes. I'm kind of reviving it. They talk about like kind of the masculine, feminine energy, attachment styles, all the inner work, inner stuff behind healthy love, relationships, and healing and freedom and all that. And I do have a course coming out. We start August 4th. Enrollment's going on right now. It's called Healing.
Nice.
Yeah, it's called Healing Anxious Attachment. And so I also have, you're kind of new to attachment styles or all that, I have a free guide breaking down the 4 attachment styles. It's anxious, dismissive, avoidant, fearful, avoidant, and then secure. And
Hmm.
then I also have a free quiz on my website that you can take to figure out your attachment style. So yeah, the best way to connect me is through social media, TikTok, Instagram, and then also grabbing one of my freebies, getting on my newsletter. Then you'll get email love from me every week, just giving you extra tips and insight. And you get like the first exclusive access to any of my offers. Um,
I
so
love
yeah,
it. I love it. And we definitely have to have you back whenever you're free
yes,
for part two, because limerence is definitely up there.
yes,
Limerence, fawning, freezing, all that kind of good stuff.
yes, yes.
So,
Oh,
and
sorry. Last thing I was just gonna say, I have a Facebook group as well, called a Facebook group for women. It's called
oh,
Healed and
okay.
yeah,
What's the name of the group?
Healed and Free. So it's like the community aspect of the podcast.
Okay.
And I
And
have a free masterclass in there about the father wound.
okay, nice. And you know what I will do is I will definitely link everything to the show notes so people can see what you're doing and connect with you and get all the access to all your stuff. So I'll put that out there on all the channels for you.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm so honored, and it was so fun talking to you.
Likewise, thank you for coming. Okay, I would love to know your thoughts on that show. What did you think about all of the gems and nuggets that Erica dropped? Did any of that stuff resonate with you? Let's definitely continue the conversation and continue to talk about it over on social media. Definitely, you can find the chat continues on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So I look forward to seeing you guys over there. And until next week, you guys take care of yourselves and be well. Bye bye now. Check out the sneak preview of next week's episode.
So men and women, we know that we are different. We can look at science, our brains. Things are very different. The way that we experience love, our phases of attraction, what makes us feel honored, what makes us feel loved, it's really different. And so a lot of times there's some traits that usually go along with women that we would call in the feminine energy, such as being creative, more emotionally in tune, being very intuitive, the flow, being able to receive, surrendered, all that kind of stuff. Then you have traits that usually kind of go along with more of that masculine energy. So that's a lot more in the head space. So very logic driven, very goal action oriented, very do, and whereas the feminine is kind of more of that being type of energy. And where the masculine is kind of more of that leaning forward, the feminine is more of that leaning back. This is why you'll see like a lot of men, most men, they want to, you know, pursue, they want to lead. And so, and if a woman is, say, like maybe chasing him, rather literally or emotionally, it can kind of turn a man off. Just different dynamics that kind of go at play, or the reason why, you know, we see a lot in, like, say there's like a conflict going on, a lot of times women, we want to talk about it right now, be really emotional, let's connect, but men often need time to kind of go away and retreat. And they often sometimes think more in like solution based. And that's why sometimes there's that conflict.